On the 1st of January 1944, al-Bashir was born in Hashabanaga, just north of the capital. He was born to a family of African Arabic descendants and was part of the al-Badaria al-Damashir tribe. This tribe was known as the Bedouin tribe, which belonged to the larger Ja'adin coalition, which was an Arab tribe in the middle of northern Sudan, which was at once part of the Kingdom of Egypt and Sudan. Moreover, Bashir's birth date meant that he was born in the later part of the Anglo-British period, causing him to have first-hand experience of what it took to gain independence and how culturally and socially to the Sudanese people this was the most important thing possible. At the time of independence, Omar was 12 years old. At 12 years old, most lads his age are probably thinking about school and family and other things that preoccupy their time. To most, politics is something that looms over the back of their minds. Some children may have pipe dreams of becoming president and gaining power. However, most lack the conviction, passion, and the crazy to achieve it. At the young age of 16, Bashir joined the Sudanese military. By joining the military, Bashir in turn studied at the Egyptian Military Academy in Cairo and the Sudanese Military Academy in Khartoum. He graduated from these universities in 1966 at the age of 22. This led him into the Greater Sudanese military, where he rose through the ranks to become a paratrooper officer. And he served in the Egyptian army during the Yom Kippur War in 1973 against Israel. Then again, 2 years later, in 1975, he was sent by the Sudanese army to the UAE as a Sudanese military attaché. A military attaché is a term used to describe the role of a military expert who is attached to an embassy or any other diplomatic mission. This role is often filled by a high-ranking military officer which retains his commission while serving in the embassy. Moreover, this role allows the said military officer holding the post at the time to be deployed into service for another sovereign state. This promotion tells us a few things about Bashir. First, that he was held in high regard. The second, that he held a high position in the military. The third, that he was good at what he did, since he was able to apply through the Sudanese ranks in the short time of 15 years, and at the age of 31, compared to most traditional officers who worked for decades upon decades to get to his position at the age of 50 or 60. These all pointed to the fact that he was well equipped and well connected enough to successfully overthrow the government at the time. However, he chose not to do this and was awarded with another promotion to brigadier in the Sudanese army in 1989. His next step with this promotion was to lead a group of officers in a military coup which ousted the democratically elected government of Prime Minister Sadiq al-Mahdi on the 30th of June 1989.
It was in the midst of civil war that al-Bashir seized power from Prime Minister Sadiq al-Mahdi on the 30th of June 1989.
In 1989, Bashir also made two other notable changes, first being implementing what was then and now seen as a skewed version of Sharia law, which meant to complement and satisfy Bashir and his comrades' desires. At this point, some of the non-Muslim viewers were probably asking, what is Sharia law? To boil a very complex idea for the sake of clarity, time and brevity, the dictionary definition of Sharia law is Islamic or Sharia law is a religious law forming the part of Islamic tradition. It is derived from the religious precepts of Islam, particularly the Quran and the Hadith. The problem with the way that Sharia law was implemented in Sudan was that in some places things like alcohol were served. By the way, alcohol is forbidden in Islam, punished. It was this dichotomy of rules in the different regions and cities and even places which helped make the law convoluted to the layman. The next thing that Bashir did was definitely more Orwellian rather than haphazardly brought to fruition. The next step that Bashir had done was to suspend all political parties in Sudan, making it a military dictatorship by all accounts. He then continued his grasping for power by becoming the chairman of the Revolutionary Command Council for National Salvation. The Revolutionary Command Council was a newly established political body with legislative and executive powers that described what was seen as a transition period. After becoming chairman, he allied himself with Hassan al-Turbi of the National Islamic Front. Their most impactful action in this newly formed marriage between the two groups was to institutionalize Sharia law, solving the initial problem of inconsistency. However, like all great dictators before him, he soon became paranoid. He began to issue purges and executions of people he thought were going to overthrow him in the upper ranks of the army. In the peak of this paranoia, he banned associations, political parties, and independent newspapers. Now, the following is my own theory, and has not been backed up by any political scientists or any reports from the people at the time. However, in my retrospective view, the reason Bashir heavily banned these three things was because they all gave liberty to the people of Sudan. Independent newspapers gave people the ability to be knowledgeable about the country's actions internally and internationally, and how this would affect them, without the biased lens that government media has. This is because an array of journalistic publications ranging up and down the political spectrum allows the Sudanese people to boil down their events and stories into strands of truth, which help to show a larger truth. A truth that can be presented to Turbi and Bashir in an unfavorable light, which could potentially skew the large majority of Sudanese people against them.
Oh, why don't I keep my big mouth shut?
Thus, to mitigate this risk, they made sure that only state-manipulated truths could easily be accessed. Now that truth was suppressed, one of the three infinity stones of liberty were destroyed. Bashir had two more to go. The next infinity stone he would destroy was political parties. As again stated in my theory, he did this because it limited the autonomy of the Sudanese people. Thus, they cannot choose. The lack of a societal change to either benefit or hurt the Sudanese people. The stripping of social autonomy is one of the first things a dictator does, along with also limiting truths. This is because a lack of truth along with a lack of choice means a lack of power. A lack of power means the inability to stimulate and carry radical but necessary societal change. And it was this stagnation which secured Bashir's rule. 2 out of the 3 infinity stones destroyed.
I don't feel so good.
The last infinity stone he needed to destroy to get his power cemented was the destruction of associations. However, it is important to note that there is a difference between political parties and an association. The main difference is that associations are people and groups joined together by similar views and often cooperate with each other, so it doesn't necessarily have to be political, whereas a political party has all of its members together under one cohesive political ideology and greater identity. The banning of associations was perhaps done to squash the factions forming in the National Front or the military or Bashir's aides or anyone really. The reason for Bashir's paranoia was due to his fear of being the target of some sort of coup or assassination, leading to the question: if power is obtained ruthlessly or in an undemocratic fashion, does it lead the central ruler to become paranoid? It's weird how many of these dictators draw striking parallels to Macbeth, and how in death they die like Macbeth. For example, Gaddafi was also a dictator. However, it is arguable how bad he was. And that's a whole nother timeline episode in itself. But nonetheless, Gaddafi, like Macbeth, was brutally murdered with mobile phone footage to add humiliation to injury. As his paranoia increased, he started imprisoning political figures and journalists, and basically anyone who could challenge his power, no matter whether it was direct opposition or not. On the 16th of October 1993, Bashir appointed himself the President of Sudan, increasing his power within the country, following the footsteps of the dictators before him. After this move, he disbanded the Revolutionary Command Council for National Salvation and other rival political parties. These acts were the real-life consequences on his ban on associations, political parties, and independent newspapers. In the financial world, it was noted that in the early 1990s, in the early part of Bashir's 30-year reign, Bashir greenlit to release a new currency in circulation. The currency was called the Sudanese dinar and was intended to replace the old Sudanese pound that had lost 90% of its value during the turbulent 1980s financial market. This new currency failed and was replaced back with the pound, but now at a much higher rate. Oh yeah, somewhere over this timeline, he had made it law that only he could run for elections, again following the footsteps of other dictators. It's my theory.
That's just a theory. A game theory.
That dictators do this purely to stroke their ego, as elections such as the one highlighted serve no logistical purpose and only stand to produce the illusion of democracy. It's basically this. To the normal person who hasn't wasted their time on understanding the psyche of truly power-hungry people, one may ask, why? Well, think about it. Elections, in every sense of the word, comes down to a simple popularity contest. We, as humans, even at a young age, love to produce artificial ranks about God knows what. It's only natural that we carry this into adulthood on a larger scale, implementing it into the wider society. But people like Bashir, they can get anything they want, when they want, with little effort. However, the one thing that they desire, which is hard to attain, is respect. And it's this lust for respect, which at some point causes these people to conflate it with popularity. This is because they overlook the key differences, which is popularity is derived from what the person does and says, whilst respect is derived from a deeper position of ethics and morals. Respect, respect, respect. The thing that dictators sacrificed for their lifestyle they initially want to lead. Now, this conflation means that the dictator now has a dependency on popularity so that he can feel respected by the wider population. Thus, he makes sure he can, like a drug addict, get the rush of popularity running through his veins and the endorphins shooting up down his brains, and he makes sure by making sure there is no other option, no other choice. Choice is basically freedom, choice is basically liberty. And Bashir was smart enough and conniving enough to realize that destroying choice is the best step to ultimate control. However, he learned masking it under the guise of democracy and liberation, the very thing it destroys, make sure that the mutilation of choice happens smoothly. On the topic of mutilation and other ICC-labeled war crimes, Darfur also happened under Bashir in February of 2003. But what exactly was Darfur? The Darfur genocide refers to the systematic killing of Darfuri men, women and children, which occurred during the ongoing conflict in Western Sudan. Like any conflict, there were two sides to it. On one side, there was Omar al-Bashir's Khartoum government and the Janjaweed. On the other side, there was the Justice and Equality Movement along with the Sudanese Liberation Army. The best way to draw sides is to label them. The Janjaweed as a government ally and the Khartoum government as a government group, whilst labeling the Sudanese Liberation Army and the Justice and Equality Movement as a rebel group. Most accounts of this time show the genocide as being carried out by the government group and their ally against three specific tribes: the Fur tribe, the Muslat tribe, which at the time accounted for 60% of Darfur itself, and the Zaghawas tribe. The reason these specific tribes were targeted was because the two rebel group members had its members mostly coming from these specific tribes. When one asks what's the reason for the conflict, the most common idea is that Arabs were killing African blacks. Moreover, media coverage of the situation perpetuates the old and easy stereotype of Africa as a continent that's uniquely afflicted by civil war and instability. This was a heavily reduced picture of the situation. As Ahmed Sikanji, an author and associate professor of history and African American studies at Ohio State University, noted in his study, labeling it as one between Arabs and black Africans is misleading. In reality, there are no visible racial or religious differences between the warring parties in Darfur. All parties involved in the conflict, whether they are referred to as Arab or African, are equally indigenous, equally black, and equally Muslim. What Singenga said has some merit, as Sudan has a long history of internal migration, mixing, and intermarriage. This is especially true for Darfur, which over time had developed a remarkable ethnic fluidity. As a consequence, Singaija said that the people in Sudan, especially Darfur, and especially in Darfur, the Arabs and the black Africans were equally as black and equally as Muslim. Thus, ethnic labels were made redundant in their original purpose of labeling ethnicities. As a consequence, they stayed for convenience and changed meaning to refer to the typical occupation of the Arabs and black Africans respectively. Because the typical occupation of an Arab was a cattle farmer, as the majority of Arab-speaking groups are cattle farmers. On the other hand, the label black African was to refer to the sedentary farmers, as the black Africans, the non-predominant Arab speakers, were sedentary farmers. However, even these occupational boundaries were often crossed, thus leading to two questions: whether there was any difference between them at all, and how do tensions rise to such a level?